You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, world, and welcome to Tales from Hollywoodland, a veritable feast of movies, television, Broadway, showbiz stories, and even a little bit of news and gossip. With Julian Schlossberg, Arthur E. Friedman, Stephen J. Rubin, and I'm announcer Mike Faber, who's just a little bit tired. Today we talk to Robert Hofler, author, journalist, and film historian extraordinaire. And now, here's Steve.
Wow, Mike, that was a great introduction. Robert, welcome to our show. It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
This is a movie-loving show. We all love movies. We talk about them. We watch them. We breathe them. And you obviously are a member of the clan. I'm curious where your love of film began, and go back as far as you want. Where did you develop a love of film?
I think it was with the movie Giant, and I saw it on its original run, and I fell in love with the house in Texas. And I begged my family, who lived in Iowa, we have to go see that house, which of course was just a flat. But I also remember that right after I saw the movie, my mother had this kind of coffee clatch of friends, and they were real gossips. And I think that's where my gossip mentality came from. And Rock Hudson had recently been on the cover of Life magazine as Hollywood's most handsome bachelor. And some of the women were saying that they really liked Rock Hudson in Giant, but I think it was my mother or one of her friends who said, I don't think much of Rock Hudson because his agent or his publicist or people told him he had to get married. It would be good for his career. And I knew that something was up. And I had this fascination with then his agent, Henry Wilson. And of course, it was Henry Wilson's lesbian secretary, Phyllis Gates, whom Rock Hudson married. And everyone thinks it had to do with Confidential magazine, that Confidential magazine was going to come out with a story about Rock Hudson being gay. That isn't what really hurt Rock Hudson. What hurt Rock Hudson was that cover story in Life magazine, because Life magazine said he's going to be 30 years old next month and he's not married. He has to explain to the public why he's not married. So he got married. And then I kind of knew about that Henry Wilson also had Troy Donahue and Tab Hunter. And the first book I wrote, The Man Who Invented Rock Hudson, was originally titled Rock Tab Troy. And then, of course, when I did research for it, I found out that he had many other very good-looking male clients: Robert Wagner, Chad Everett, John Saxon, Rory Calhoun, Robert Wagner, Guy Madison. Guy Madison.
Wild Bill Hitchcock himself.
Absolutely.
Not Wild Bill Hitchcock. Hickok.
No, Hitchcock to me.
George Nader.
Bob? No, George Nader was not a client of his.
But I remember in your book, because you do such extraordinary research. I mean, you give research a new meaning, in my opinion. But in that book, you tell us that there was a girl named Julia Turner who came to him, and she became
Lana Turner.
That's right. So
yeah.
At least one time he went on the other team.
Yes, he did. He tried to get her a contract and no one would buy a contract, because that's how you started people then. You got them a 6-month contract and you just hoped that they would renew it for a 7-year. And anyway, no one would sign her to a contract. And he said to someone at 20th Century Fox, why don't you sign her? And the guy said, she can't act. And Henry Wilson said, I didn't say she could act. I said she could be a movie star. And that was Henry Wilson.
Yes. Milton Berle once told me that she was about as hetero as any girl could possibly be. And she had a good time.
Well, Henry Wilson also had another very famous female client, and that was Natalie Wood. And he didn't name her, but he took her on when she was a child. She was already established as a child star, but he got her the role in Rebel Without a Cause, which took her to adult stardom.
That's true.
Rebel Without a Cause. What a legacy that movie left.
The thing about Henry
James
Wilson,
Dean,
though, I'm sorry, Steve.
I was just going to say, James Dean dies in the crash. Natalie Wood drowns. Nick Adams, I think Nick Adams committed suicide.
And Sal Mineo.
And Sal Mineo was murdered. I mean,
was murdered.
And the gentleman who played one of the fathers, I think he also had a suicide as well. When you were doing all of your research on Rock Hudson, Robert, what were some of your primary sources? I assume Rock was long gone.
Was long gone. My primary sources for that were two assistants that Henry Wilson had and his secretary. And all three of them adored Henry Wilson. And they had worked for him for 10 or 15 years, and they stayed in touch with him to the end of his life, which was about 1976. And he died penniless. It was the Motion Picture Home, which is called something else now. But he was the first agent to be accepted there. And I think now at that home, you can pay to stay there. Some of it is charity. But he was a charity case, and he actually died. He was put in a pauper's grave and didn't even have a gravestone, but he does now. Someone paid for a gravestone after my book was published.
Oh,
the rumor was Debbie Reynolds. Do you think it's true?
Well, I think it might be Debbie, because at the very end of my research on that book, and I used to do a lot of press junkets for movies, you know, how those would take place either at the Four Seasons in Beverly Hills or the Regency here in New York. And a lot of times I would get quotes from people because I was working on this book. So they were plugging their movie, but I'd say, oh, do you mind if I ask you about this? And I did quite a long interview, and she says, oh, I'll buy him a gravestone. And then after my book came out, the very famous ICM agent, Ed L'Amato, who represented people like Richard Gere, called me up at Variety and said, you know, I'd like to buy a gravestone. And I said, well, call Valhalla Cemetery. And he did, and then he called me back and he said, they say he already has a gravestone. And I said, well, it was news to me. And I just have a feeling it was Debbie Reynolds, because I don't know why else. But she said that she would when I told her he didn't have a gravestone.
You know, it was interesting that Henry Wilson, before he went out on his own, worked for David O. Selznick, the toughest producer in the business. So Selznick really had great taste. So he obviously knew Wilson could really bring in people and talent.
Well, Wilson worked for the Zeppo Marx agency in the 30s. And of course, Zeppo had Barbara Stanwyck, Robert Taylor, Clark Gable, Carol Lombard, and Wilson handled the young talent. So that's what Selznick was looking for. And what's very interesting about that, Selznick hired him to be head of talent. And at the same time, he hired a model named Anita Colby, who in the 30s was known as the Face. And she was the first $100 an hour model in the Depression. And he hired her as his feminine director. And when I spoke to David Selznick's son, Danny, he said essentially Henry Wilson was the masculine director. And he taught Guy Madison and Rory Calhoun how to dress, how to get their hair cut, fix their teeth, and all of these things, which is exactly what Anita Colby did for the women who were booked there. So that was interesting.
Robert, did Anita Colby ever get into the movies?
I think she did have one brief appearance before she worked for Selznick. There was an interesting anecdote about that because, of course, Henry Wilson ended up having the biggest gay casting couch in Hollywood, but he learned that from the straight men like David O. Selznick. And for that book, I interviewed Shirley Temple, who was under contract. And Shirley Temple told me, if you walked into David Selznick's office and he had his shoes off, you had to watch out. Shirley Temple.
I think it would have been considered a national crime to do anything against Shirley Temple. I know John Agar has the privilege of deflowering her.
Okay. She told me that Selznick, she and her mother thought, oh, Selznick will take care of her. And then as soon as she signed, he just rented her out to anyone he could get money for. You know, that's what he would do with his stars because he was desperate for money after Gone with the Wind. That he would, you know, he was paying them, I don't know how many thousands of dollars a week, but he would rent them out to other studios for many more $1,000s a week.
What did you think of Henry Wilson's portrayal in the TV series Hollywood that Rob Reiner was involved in?
I cannot think of. You mean the Ryan Murphy?
Yes.
Hollywood series?
Yes.
Yeah. Jim Parsons told someone who works at the Wrap, where I also work, he said, I used Robert Hofler's book, The Man Who Invented Rock Hudson, as my Bible. I cannot think of any portrayal that is further from what I wrote than that portrayal. Yeah. You know, he kind of looked like Henry when Henry was in the 40s. He was thinner, then he gained weight. But I always saw Henry as this almost kind of mafioso type. And they portrayed him simply as this nasty, evil queen. And one thing Henry would never, ever have done, there's a scene in the movie where Wilson has a party that George Cukor gives, and Rock Hudson shows up in this horrible suit. And in front of everyone, Henry Wilson says, how could you wear such a terrible outfit, you stupid bumpkin? That is something Henry Wilson would never, ever have done. And also, Henry Wilson really watched them and groomed them. He would have known what Rock Hudson or Guy Madison or any of those men were going to wear if they ever stepped outside of their apartment. He used to run around at night in his car and check out all of his clients to see who was staying in their apartment. He completely controlled their lives. And yes, he did, want sexual favors, but he was really smart in the way that he handled them. And he groomed them. And I don't mean groom them to be, like sex toys. He really groomed them the way that Anita Colby groomed the female stars at like Selznick's studio. He took care of them.
What was his downfall? He must have made a fortune.
He made a fortune and he lost it all. He did have some ailment. I think it was colitis. And so he was an alcoholic. He took these drugs for the pain. And what was wrong with him is, like his assistant said, he couldn't get beyond Rock Hudson in Pillow Talk. Of course, Pillow Talk was a huge, huge success. But going into the 60s, all of a sudden that looked dated. That's when Clint Eastwood came up. That's when Sean Connery as 007 came up. And so the public was wanting a much darker kind of leading man, much more sinister. And Rock Hudson didn't have any of those edges. But, it's very interesting because what Henry Wilson did bring to the cinema in the 30s, if you go back and look at a lot of the leading men, they can almost seem a little effeminate to us now. And in the 40s, what Henry Wilson did, he took the World War II soldiers and sailors and made them movie stars. So that was a new kind of masculinity coming into the 50s. But he didn't reinvent them again going into the 60s, because that was the era of Clint Eastwood and Sean Connery, basically. And
Rock also had a huge TV hit, didn't he?
Well, he had a TV hit, but that was after Henry Wilson. And everyone was trying to get, and Henry wasn't developing new clients. He had Rock Hudson, and Rock Hudson from from 57 to 65 was the number one box office in Hollywood. So Henry had a great deal of clout, but he didn't have anyone else. And then it was, I think it was called CMA, which became CAA.
Creative Management Associates.
Yeah, they took him away, Freddie Fields. And the way they took him away, because Henry was threatening to throw acid in Rock's face. And Rock was always afraid that Henry would blackmail him. And what Freddie Fields did is he gave Henry Wilson a job for $100,000 a year to be a vice president at CMA. And then after a year, he was on his own. So that's how they got Rock away from Henry Wilson. But CMA got Rock Hudson no jobs. And then Rock had to go to another agency, and they got him Macmillan and Wife. Was that it?
Yes.
Yes.
But that was all. Henry was basically finished by then.
It is ironic that you write that book and your first movie is Giant. I wanted to talk to you about The Way They Were, another book you wrote about the incredible success story of Barbra Streisand, Robert Redford, Ray Stark, Sidney Pollack. You've got quite a list, Arthur Lawrence. What a group of egomaniacal guys. And you kind of lay it out pretty well, don't you?
Well, it was interesting to me at the Oscars. Barbra Streisand had said that Robert Redford didn't want to take the part and wouldn't do it until they did a lot of rewrites. They did a lot of rewrites, but he did wait a long time, and they were right up to the last minute that they were ready to start production. And Ray Stark told Sidney Pollack, it's now or never. It's got to be today. And what Robert Redford told me in an interview, which was done through email, was that he trusted Sidney Pollack to get the script in shape. And then when he signed on, that's when they did all the rewrites. And Alvin Sargent did most of the rewrites on that character, although he wasn't credited. And the big scene he wrote was the Union Station, where Barbra Streisand's character has come back from Washington, D.C., and the House on Un-American Activities, and Robert Redford is angry she went, and they get into a fight in Union Station. And he blames her for caring too much about the blacklist, because he said, take the long view. I don't know his exact words, but it's something like, take the long view. In 10 years, no one will remember this, and all of these people who were blacklisted will be working for these movies again anyway. Of course, which is what happened with Dalton Trumbo, but Dalton Trumbo had to go to jail first. It was that kind of thing that Arthur Lawrence did not want in the screenplay. Arthur Lawrence really saw it as Katie's story. He did not see it as Hubble's, but, he also wanted Robert Redford. Well, if you want Robert Redford at that point in his career wasn't going to play a featured player, which is what Lawrence wrote.
I think they originally were talking about Ryan O'Neal, but of course she had already done the movie with Barbara, and I think their romance was over. So there were a lot of reasons why that didn't happen. But they knew
no, he was, if Redford would have ultimately said no, and I'm telling you, there was a scene in the book where Pollack met with Ray Stark at some hotel room, and they got into a huge argument, and it was like, it's now or never. And Pollack went to Redford that night and said, you've got to say yes or no tonight. And he did. And if he would have said no, it would have been Ryan O'Neal. Now, she had also approached someone she had a brief fling with, which was Warren Beatty. And I think if Beatty would have taken it, Beatty rejected all these roles that then went to Robert Redford. I forget but there's a whole list of them. I've forgotten what they are. But what I find interesting about that movie is because I was working as a theater reporter at Variety at the time, and that's when I met you. And everyone was telling me, Arthur really based that character on himself and his lover, Tom Hatcher. But I think he really based it more on his relationship with Farley Granger, because it was when he was with Farley Granger and they were working on the Alfred Hitchcock movie Rope, that the whole blacklist was taking place.
I think that's true. When I had a very long interview with Arthur Lawrence, and he confirmed what you're saying, that it was Barbara was that's his role. That's what and he was at Cornell, and he took a writing course. And at the writing course, the teacher said he was a terrible writer. And it really hurt him. And he ran out of at Cornell crying, but he put that in The Way We Were, where Barbara gets that note.
This whole idea of Arthur basing it on his own relationship with Mr. Granger, I assume 50 years ago when the movie came out, that was not something that was part of their press materials.
No, he told a story that there was a woman at Cornell who was a communist whose name was Fanny Price with a P, not Fanny Bryce with a B. And she was a communist, and he based it on her. And he kind of left it at that. He really didn't do a lot of press. I mean, people weren't interested in who the screenwriter was. You've got Barbra Streisand and Robert Redford. So that's what everyone was interested about. What I love in that thing, he included his script, and they shot a scene where Katie Marasco was told by her writing teacher that she didn't have talent, but they cut the scene. But there was a scene, and it was filmed, and then you see her in the classroom, and Robert Redford is getting all this praise. And then the next scene, she's taking her short story and ripping it up. In between there was a scene with the professor, but they cut it out. The scene I love that is based directly on Tom Hatcher and Arthur Lawrence, but in reverse, before they go to Hollywood, FDR has died, and Hubble makes the mistake of taking Katie to this Republican party on Sutton Place with all these waspy friends of his, and they're making jokes about Eleanor and FDR, and Katie Marasco, Barbra Streisand, freaks out. And she says, "Why did you bring me here to be with these people?" That happened in reverse to Tom Hatcher and Arthur Lawrence. Arthur Lawrence used to take Tom Hatcher, who was a failed actor who could only get work if he was cast in a show that Arthur Lawrence was either directing or had written. And he would take him to these Broadway parties where there were these, and Tom Hatcher was this waspy, green-eyed, blonde, gorgeous. He was as good-looking as Robert Redford, and he would take him to these parties where he would meet these Jewish intellectuals, Leonard Bernstein, Jerome Robbins, Camden and Green, and Stephen Sondheim, and they would treat him like he was this boy toy. And Hatcher would say to Lawrence, "Why did you bring me here? Why did you bring me here?" So I love the way in which he turned that around.
Robert, I want to just mention that my favorite genre of movies is the Way We Were genre, romantic drama. And I would put that movie in my own particular top 10 choices of favorite movies of all time. It's a great movie. I've worked with Redford on two movies, Quiz Show and The River Runs Through It. Got to know Bob pretty well. For anybody to think that whether it be whatever actor was around at the time, Warren Beatty or Ryan O'Neal, would be a better choice than Redford. Redford was the perfect choice to play Hubble Gardner. He was fantastic in that movie. In so many ways that it made for magic. The whole film was magic.
Well, Sidney Pollack said he would not direct it without Redford. That was Streisand's first choice, and he was Arthur Lawrence's first choice. It was only afterwards that Lawrence became angry with him because he was asking for rewrites, and they did Lawrence said, and of course, a lot of the things Lawrence said ended up not being true, but he said that he wanted a meeting with Redford to find out what Redford wanted, and Pollock would not allow that. And it was all going through Pollock. So Lawrence tried to give Redford what he wanted, but finally then they turned to Alvin Sargent and a few other people to rewrite it. But everyone involved with that wanted Redford. The one who really didn't feel that strongly about it one way or another was Ray Stark. He was happy with Ryan O'Neal.
Well, you know, the last scene of that movie, of The Way We Were.
Well, that is one of the great last scenes.
That's one of the, it's unbelievable. The touch of the hair of the Plaza Hotel, the music, the coming in is that only that Marvin Hamlish did that, such an incredible song. But the way that blended everything, I'm running across the street, going to the other girl, it was fantastic. Really, it was.
The definition of wistfulness.
It's interesting because I think the first act of that movie in New York and on the college campus is very strong. Where it's weak, I think, is the Hollywood section. And, you know, they cut out over a half an hour. I don't know what kind of movie they thought they were making, but there was a half an hour of that movie that was chopped out where you really went into each of these characters. Like one character was John Huston. Another character was, I forget the name of the agent, but she was a very famous agent. And she was someone who was a communist, but then she named names, and she was actually Robert Redford's first agent in Hollywood. There was a Dalton Trumbo character, and a lot of that was cut out. And I spoke to the film editor on it, and he said, when we were cutting the film, we realized the only thing that was important was that Katie had to have a cause. And when we were getting into the blacklist, it was becoming these other characters. And all that was necessary is that she have a cause. And we were getting away from the romance.
And you're
what was the great line when she says to him, when he says to her, "Have you been a nice Jewish girl?" And he says, and she says back, "Have you been a nice Gentile boy?" or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. Great line.
That was Alvin Sargent. That was not Arthur Lawrence. There was a line, though, that Arthur Lawrence wrote. When they first make love, you couldn't call it making love. They had sex. He falls asleep on her. And then later on, he's back in her apartment and they're in front of a fireplace. And then it kind of dissolves into this montage of them running around New York City. It was not supposed to dissolve. He was supposed to say in front of the fireplace, "It will be better this time." Meaning it will be better sex this time. And Redford refused to say it. And Ray Stark freaked out. In my book, I have dozens of memos from Ray Stark to Sidney Pollack saying, we're reshooting that scene. He has to say it'll be better this time. And Redford refused to say it.
Would you agree with Redford?
No, I think he should have said it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it didn't hurt or help the film, obviously. So what I want to ask is this: Arthur, as you alluded to, and we both knew him, did have a tendency to make his own stories up.
But yeah.
One of the things he told me was that when they were beginning to shoot, after having 9 or 10 writers, the script, they called him, begging him, claims Arthur, to come out because there were all kinds of problems with the film in after they shot a while. And he said he went out and he said there were holes that just needed filling. It wasn't, he said, a huge rewrite. What he had to do was kind of fill the so-called holes. Did you find that to be an accurate story or not?
It was an accurate story, but it was Ray Stark who asked him to come. Yeah. And Sidney Pollack was very angry about it because Sidney Pollack didn't want him there. But Arthur Lawrence was also really, really in love with the Blacklist story. And there was interesting stuff. When I read it, I was going like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And it was Dalton Trumbo's story. And there's a scene where Barbara Streisand is with his agent, Myra, somebody whose name is escaping me right now. And they're at the farmer's market and they run into each other. And Katie says to her, how dare you name names, HUAC, da-da-da-da. That was one scene. There was a Dalton Trumbo character who gave a big speech and riled everyone up. There were a lot of scenes, but I think Arthur was in love with the Blacklist story, and maybe he was too much in love with it. There was one line, though, that Barbara fought for, and I think is really important. At the end, she says to him, give me a call. Doesn't she say it's David X. Cohen? It's in the book. And he says, why the X? And she says, because it's the only Cohen with an X. They were not going to film that. And she on the airplane said, we're putting that in. And I think that's very important because it says she's gone back to her roots and she realizes she's made a mistake with marrying the Wasp. And I think that's why a sequel could never be made, because it would be then like, oh, she should have ended up with Robert Redford. No, she shouldn't have ended up with Robert Redford. That was it. And Redford had said he never ever wanted to do a sequel. He was never on board for a sequel.
Robert, was his first agent someone named Stark?
No, it was Myra something. And she was the character in the film. You will remember that Katie is with a red-haired woman who is Hubble's agent, and they're playing volleyball out on the beach in Malibu. And the red-haired agent says, you can live in style. I can get him a great deal. And Katie says, I thought we were living in style. That character, that red-haired woman whose name is, she has a strange, her first name is like Allen, Allyn. I forget what her name is now. But that was a huge part in the movie. And she was someone who was a communist who named names the way that Jerome Robbins and Elia Kazan did.
How great, Robert, were these little scenes like the scene of Redford and Brad Dillman, whatever his name is.
Dillman.
Sailing on the ocean, yeah. sailing and then going into what would be a favorite year, 1944, 1945. Yeah. And the music cue comes in. They use the music cue of that theme so effectively throughout the movie. And that's one of the great spots of it being used.
Robert, all of this attention to leaving out scenes to cut the running time. Obviously, it was very important in those days to keep films shorter. That seems to have all gone out the window lately. Our films seem to be longer than ever. And sometimes I wonder how things have changed, that editors are not allowed to, or they're not given parameters like they did back in the 70s or earlier than that. Any thoughts personally, since you've covered the scenes for so many years, any thoughts on why movies today are so long?
Maybe they're in competition with all of these Netflix and HBO TV series, even when they're limited series, like right now it's Love Story, JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette, and they go on for 8 hours. Even with most of those, I'm kind of like, could you just wrap this up? Did you see the Ripley one? I think it's on Netflix. It was The Talented Mr. Ripley, but they just called it Ripley. There are more shots of just like animals and little gargoyles on the Amalfi Coast. And I always like a movie has a nice arc. It has an arc. Okay, it's going to end now. And I kind of like the 2 hours, sometimes 2 hours and 15 minutes, but a lot of these series, it could be that a lot of the movies feel that they're in competition now with these TV series that are limited.
Well, what I'm interested in, you wrote a book called The Movie That Changed My Life. which is an incredibly great idea. And not only did you write it, but you seem to get politicians, movie stars, directors. You got a whole group of people to talk about that. What were the couple of movies that stood out, Robert, number one? And number two, did anyone that you were disappointed turn you down that you wanted to get the answer from?
Well, what I kept getting, that was an assignment that I had at Variety that they wanted. I don't know what they were selling ads against, but they were selling ads against something. And they wanted to do my favorite film. And I came back to them and I said, no one is responding. And I said, I'm going to change this to the movie that changed my life. And what we did with a lot of it, originally it was people who were not in the entertainment business. They were all politicians or scientists and whatever. So that was, and occasionally, a lot of times I would get people because, like the soprano Anna Netrebko had an album coming out. Someone had, had a book coming out. I think, Bill Maher had a book coming out, I think. So that, and then sometimes they would go, I remember Paul Krugman, and he says, well, I don't know if any movie changed my life. And I said, okay, what affected it a little bit? And of course, what was interesting about the project is that everyone mentioned a movie from their childhood. So,
did anybody mention Giant?
I don't think anyone mentioned Giant, though. I will tell you, because another book I wrote was Money, Murder, and Dominic Dunn. And Dominic Dunn was the closet case. And he, and he kept talking about his wife and his 3 children, And, but anyway, I called him up and he was happy to talk about it. And he said, the movie that changed my life was Now Voyager. When I saw Betty Davis, I was 13 years old, and I saw Betty Davis walk off that boat. I knew that I could be somebody. And I was kind of like, am I talking to a straight man or someone who pretends to be straight? Well, then, of course, I later on did a biography of him and talked to the pimp who used to supply him with call boys.
Yeah. I would think that To Kill a Mockingbird and Citizen Kane and Chinatown, didn't those films come up more than once or twice, or not really?
I'm trying to think the other one, since I mentioned Bill Maher, I remember that he talked about being a young boy and seeing Marilyn Monroe in Some Like It Hot, and in that scene where she has that nude outfit on and she's singing and the spotlight just comes kind of just above her nipples, and he talked about how that changed his life. That's what I remember. I remember. I somehow remember that.
I was handling publicity for Showtime, and we were making a short film with Griffin Dunn directing. Yeah. And Griffin and his father comes out. Dominic Dunn is there, and Steven Spielberg comes out to visit his wife, Kate Capshaw. We were doing a short film where the star was an unknown actor. And I'm going to forget his name now. Wait a second. Who played the first Spider-Man?
Is it Tobey Maguire?
Thank you. Tobey Maguire was an unknown actor. So it was Tobey Maguire and Kate Capshaw. And they're standing at the camera, and I'm standing with Dominic, and I knew about his daughter being murdered. That was a horrible story, and couldn't have been nicer. And they all turned to me at one point, and they said I looked just like Steve Ross, the head of Warner Brothers. There was a little moment there. But in terms of the scene, sorry, a little anecdote there. The scene, I want to go back to the length of movies today. You obviously love movies. You're an historian. I'm curious, do you go to the theater?
Well, I'm a theater critic now.
No, I mean the not the legitimate theater, the movie.
Oh, you mean cineplexes like that?
You go to the movie
Not
theaters.
very often. I really watch a lot of stuff on TV, and I wait for it. Like 10 years ago, I would have gone to see Wuthering Heights, and now I'm going like, please put it up on Spectrum. I did make an exception for Hamnet and Marty Supreme, which did not come up on Spectrum really fast. Also, I'm kind of semi-retired and I work now. I write these books, although I'm not writing anything now. And then I work as a theater critic for the Rap. But I also travel to Europe a lot. My real passion is opera. And I go to the Met a lot. In fact, later today, I'm going to the Met. But I go to Europe probably 6 times a year. And basically, they're always opera trips. And so I'm learning German, Spanish, French, and Italian. And I watch a lot of series that are in foreign languages my favorite right now, I think it's on Netflix, is called The Empress, and it's about the end of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and there's a second season coming up, and that's in German. I just watched something called Diary of a Gigolo, and that was in Spanish, and I watched something called Deceitful Love in Ghana, which was in Italian, and so that's what I enjoy doing that more than going to a cinema.
Robert, did you find Marty Supreme or Hamnet worth going to see?
Hamnet I didn't care for, but Marty Supreme I really liked. I thought it was this really shaggy dog story, and I really liked Timothée Chalamet's performance because it was so unsympathetic. And actually, one thing that has always driven me crazy about why people go to movies or theaters, they go like, well, I didn't like the character. And I've always been very attracted to very unsympathetic characters whom I somehow really identify with. And I really identified with like Henry Wilson, who was really kind of thought of as a scumbag in Hollywood. Alan Carr, I wrote a book called Party Animals. He was this movie, he produced the movie Grease, the Broadway musical La Cage aux Folles, and people thought he was disgusting, and I found him very, very interesting, and I really identified with him. So I really identified with Marty Supreme. I identified with that kind of drive. You know, I always identify, I told this to Faye Dunaway once, you know, Faye Dunaway would not allow clips from Mommy Dearest whenever they would do like, you know, honor her for something. She would not allow clips from that movie. And I told her, you know, I really identified with Joan Crawford in that movie. I really kind of identify with someone who's losing their career and they want to hang on to it.
She was very upset with that movie. She felt it hurt her career tremendously.
Oh, yeah.
And that's probably
I'm curious what's going on in our country in terms of people turning away from movie theaters, catching everything on streaming. I've almost come to the conclusion, because I've watched movies in the theater and enjoyed them very much, and then I'll watch the same movie on my couch at home and I won't enjoy it as much. Something happens physically when you're watching a movie home that doesn't happen in the movie theaters. And I'm just wondering if that's something anybody else here can identify with, because I think the theater owners are running a little scared right now. Theaters are closing all over the United States, and people over 40 are not going back to the movies. And I'm just wondering if you think there is a difference between watching it on your couch and then watching it in the theater.
Well, there isn't enough difference that I want to go back to the cinema.
You got it.
I just don't. And also, you have to remember, I see over 100 plays and musicals a year. So I'm sitting in audiences all the time. And frankly, I've begun to hate audiences, particularly in like musicals. Musicals now have been taken over by American Idol, and now it is completely appropriate and it is encouraged for audiences to applaud while someone is singing.
We saw that in The Wiz back in the 70s. They got up.
Was it?
Yeah, started applauding there. You know the great line on Film Critics? They say John Wilkes Booth, last line, last words. Or I'm sorry, I thought he was a critic. Red Buttons gets credit for that.
You know, this is one thing that I do have to talk about because I just saw a play. It's very good. It's at the Irish Rep called Ulster American with Matthew Broderick. And of course, it was about someone putting on a play. And there were all these cracks about critics. You need critics. I mean, I'm telling you, I wrote my first book, came out in 2005. I cannot tell you how many reviews I got. I write a book now, A Star is Reborn. There's 2 or 3 reviews. No one is publishing book reviews anymore. And so when these people complain about the critics who are in the theater or the movies, watch out, guys, because that's free publicity.
Oh, yeah.
The idea that Steve, that when he brought up the idea of the home versus the movie theater, in my opinion, when you're home, the phone could be ringing, the baby could be crying, you could have neighbors making noise. The nice thing about a big movie theater, you're really allowed to watch the movie. Unfortunately, as Robert started to say, audiences are becoming so rude that during a movie they could be talking on their iPhone. I mean,
absolutely.
I cannot stand the audiences. And when I do go to a movie theater, when I lived in LA, I don't even think it exists anymore. But I would always go on Sunday at like 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. And even now, if I go to Sunday, like on Times Square, no one else is in the theater. And so that is the time I go.
Well,
Julian, I want to say to you that in this last theater that I ever owned down here in Florida, with a very successful theater, the biggest single complaint we had was people not only talking but getting their phone. The light comes on, saying "Hush, I'll call you back." It was terrible, and it is terrible. It takes you right out of the moment.
My favorite experience was being in Europe in the summer of '77, the Star Wars summer, and I hadn't seen the film yet, and everybody was talking about it. So I come home to the States. We land in Chicago. On the way back to LA, I practically ran to a downtown Chicago movie palace. It was midday. There was almost no one in the theater. And I'm watching Star Wars, and I'm saying, what is the big deal about this movie? I come back to LA. I go to the Chinese theater on a Saturday night, packed, entirely different film experience completely. The audience practically rose out of their seats when the Millennium Falcon goes to light speed, and I rose with them. It was extreme. I think for the right movie experience with the right crowd, it can be an exhilarating experience. Unfortunately, we're not getting those exhilarating experiences much more.
Robert,
I think it's very important for comedies, although, I think for comedies it is. It's interesting that you bring up the first Star Wars, because I saw that as a preview somewhere in Times Square. It was one of those critics invitations, and I was working as an editor. And I didn't like the movie, but I went out the next day and found a stockbroker, and that was the first stock I bought was 20th Century Fox.
Well, you didn't,
at what price?
You didn't like it,
I don't remember. I think it was $20 a share.
Was it with Star Wars?
Yeah, and the stock did take off.
But took off. I was sitting with Sumner Redstone the morning that the movie opened, and he had, at that time he was a theater owner, owned a lot of big great theaters, and his phone kept ringing from people from his company saying, Star Wars has lines around the corner or lines around the thing, or there was something. And he called his stockbroker. The stock was selling at $7 a pop, and bought 20,000 shares just off of the reports from the lines being around the corner. Amazing. You bought the stock. So did you keep it? Did you go long?
Oh, no. I got rid of it very, very fast. Now I keep stuff much longer. You know, I never saw another Star Wars movie, and I think that was probably the beginning of my disillusionment with the movies. A lot of those that, you know, even I think I watched Sinners halfway through on Spectrum, and I thought, oh, it's another vampire movie. And then I was watching One Battle After Another, and I did watch that to the end, but I was going like, oh, this is just another action movie. I wasn't impressed with Hamnet. I don't know. I have kind of gotten out of the movie habit, I do have to say.
I want to mention to you, it's important here to switch off to a subject. Julian was good enough to send me a copy of your book about the Stars Born, and so anyway, I read some of it found it to be terrific, and I gave it to my wife, who's a voracious reader. She reads probably 3-4 books a week. Great stuff. And I said, give this a read. She loves your book. The Star is Born is a great piece of work. Boy, did you go through any kind of research for that?
That one had the least number of people. There's some books like the Dominic Dunn book. I think I interviewed over 300 people. This one, there weren't as many people to interview, but what was nice about that is I was working with 6 different movies. There are 4 movies called A Star is Born, but my favorite is What Price Hollywood from 1932, and that is actually my favorite. So I like to say What Price Hollywood was remade 4 times, not that A Star is Born was remade 3 times. But I really think the best of them is What Price Hollywood. And I was interested in that in the Star is Born movies because I knew that they were based on true stories. So I wanted to find out what those true stories were.
Well, the one thing about What Price Hollywood, look at that group of people. You got Selznick producing it. You got George Cukor directing it. You've got really Adela Rogers St. John writing it. I mean, you have some of the finest people working in film on one movie. And of course, in Adela's case, as you point out, she's just taking her friend's story and putting it in. So, but the one thing I have to tell you, when Barbra Streisand was making A Star is Born and it came out, and you've written about it quite well. Frank Pearson directed it, and he came out and carried on about how he couldn't believe how much Barbra Streisand made him do this or made him do that. And I think to myself, wait a second, he's not from Mars. Everyone knows Barbara's a perfectionist. And also, she had Final Cut right from the beginning. So what the hell is he complaining about? He could have quit. He didn't have to make it. And of course, it turned out to be, as you know, despite all the fighting, a gigantic success at the time.
It was a gigantic success. I find it now almost unwatchable, I have to say. I think that movie should be called A Diva is Unleashed. I don't feel that her character has any arc whatsoever in that movie. She is a diva from the moment we see her until the very end. What you're referring to is an article that Frank Pearson wrote for New York Magazine. That ruined his career, didn't it?
I don't really think so. I'm trying to remember. I remember when Dog Day Afternoon, I don't know if that was...
Well, Dog Day Afternoon was before. And that was one of the wild stories he told, that they wouldn't let him off the set to go to the Oscars because they were filming in Arizona or something. And they said, no, you can't go to the Oscars. So he watched it in a bar. And when he came to the set the next day, everyone congratulated him. But Barbra Streisand and John Peters only acknowledged it to say, I'm not afraid of your Oscar, when they got into some argument.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't a pleasant shoot, but
definitely not.
Inspired by your book, Robert, I watched the 1937 Frederick March, Janet Gaynor movie, which I'd never seen before, and I was very impressed with it. I didn't know anything about Janet Gaynor, and at first I said, this is not the most attractive actress in the history of Hollywood. I mean, but they really started to glamour up slowly but surely. And by the end of the movie, she's gorgeous.
Well, there is an interesting thing about the Star is Born movies, that only the 2018 movie with Lady Gaga was it a screen debut. But she was already a major pop star. But Barbra Streisand, Judy Garland, Janet Gaynor, they were... What was going on screen the opposite was happening behind the screen. Sid Luft, Judy Garland's husband, used a major female star to become a film producer and then didn't produce another movie. John Peters, who was a hairdresser, used a famous female star to become a film producer and was very successful for many years, which is exactly the opposite of what's happening on screen, where you have a famous man who takes an ingenue and turns her into a star. And I found that very interesting. And even with Janet Gaynor, she only made 2 movies after that.
Right,
And to me, she and particularly Judy Garland, I mean, this is cruel to say, but it's an ingenue role. And Judy Garland was 31 when she made it. She looked 45. I'm sorry.
You're right. I agree.
And I just have a problem with it. And what I never understood, and I didn't really sort it out in my book, but I go into great detail about it, is Humphrey Bogart wanted to play opposite her. And people are saying, oh, he's too old to play, with young Judy Garland. Lauren Bacall is younger than Judy Garland. They made 5 movies together that were successful. Humphrey Bogart was so pissed off that he didn't get the part of Norman Maine. He left Warner Brothers after 15 years, went to Paramount to make Sabrina with Audrey Hepburn, who was younger than Lauren Bacall. And I think James Mason is brilliant in the movie, but Judy Garland should have known what Katharine Hepburn knew in 1940 when she made Philadelphia Story. Remember, she made Philadelphia Story after she was declared box office poison in 1939. She did Philadelphia Story on Broadway. She got the rights to the play and then made sure that she had 2 big box office stars so they were going to carry the movie, James Stewart and Cary Grant, and Humphrey Bogart would have given Judy Garland that box office insurance.
Sure.
Even though you feel that way, I have to say, of all the Star is Born, it's my favorite. Judy Garland singing One That Got Away. The Man That Got Away. You can't do better than that in any musical anywhere.
Julian, and the fascinating thing is, Julian, that's the one Star is Born that was a box office bomb.
Yeah. AFI has a list of the 10 greatest movie songs, and they list that as number 10. I would list it as number 1, The Man That Got Away. But they spent $1 million in 1954 to get that. They filmed it in September of 1953. She did 27 takes. Who needs 27 takes? And then they weren't happy with her outfit in the set, so then they did it again over 3 days. They weren't happy with what they had in November, so in March they did it again. It was just ridiculous, and I don't understand what was wrong with George Cukor. I thought he was known as kind of like an Alfred Hitchcock or an Otto Preminger who kind of worked within the system and didn't go over budget, but he just went crazy on that movie.
Well, 27 takes, you would have thought you were talking about Barbara, but it was Judy.
And it's not only 27 takes, but 27 singing takes. It's just crazy. Well, we've come to the end of our show, but at the end of our show, we always have a little segment, Robert, where we talk about the last movie we saw. So you kind of mentioned that you did see One Battle After Another and Marty Supreme. Was that literally the last one you saw?
The last movie I would have seen, probably, I'm trying to think. I fall asleep watching old movies. And the reason I do that is because it clears my head. I can close my eyes and I'm repeating the lines and then I fall asleep. So it might have been Laura, or it might have been The Heiress, or it might have been Deception, or some old movies. Yeah, all old movies.
I discovered 2 film noirs last week that there's a channel in LA called Movies. It's kind of through channel 13 KCOP here, but it's one of those movie channels with 12,000 commercials, so you have to record the movies beforehand. But I saw 2 film noirs with Ricardo Montalban. And Ricardo Montalban, I don't know his career very well other than playing Khan in Star Trek, but I saw Border Incident and Mystery Street. And these are early 1950s MGM black and white film noirs. And if you don't know them, particularly Mystery Street, they are a true revelation. And
I have to tell you, there are a number of film noir movies I do like, but I watch GCM and Eddie Muller comes on and he goes, "This is an unknown classic. This is a real classic." And I watch it and I'm going, "Oh, come on, Eddie. It's okay. It's okay."
These were pretty riveting. Arthur, what was the last one you saw?
Watching television, like Robert and so many other people I know, we watch older movies. And I was watching, I hadn't seen it in all of this time that it was released, was Hannah and Her Sisters, with Woody Allen playing a hypochondriac, which is apparently what he is. But I laughed, and it was a great movie. Barbara Hershey.
About Max von Sydow.
Yeah,
Max von Sydow, cold.
So cold.
Oh God!
And originally, Woody wanted Jason Robards, and Jason Robards' agent didn't tell him about it.
Oh,
because he said, "Look, they'd only pay scale."
Yeah.
But Robards found out, he fired him.
What about you, Julian? What did you see last?
Oh, Born Free. I had such a wonderful time watching Born Free. I had not seen it since it originated, and while I like lions, I didn't think I'd fall in love again with these lions, but there they were. And Virginia McKenna and Bill Travers, and the music never stops. It's wall to wall, bum, 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 bum. And I loved it. I just loved watching it again hundreds of years later.
Julia, in 1967, that movie opened in the early summer. And if you chart the box office, every weekend was basically the same. 6 million, 6 million. It was a big hit. The public loved it. They loved it.
The refrain in my junior high school was "Born free, my father's a doctor." Anyways, Mike, what was your latest movie?
Latest movie actually is a classical. So one of Judy's favorite movies is actually, we got to see The Music Man with Robert Preston. And it was just always good. But the chemistry between
Can I tell you something? You something? I'm from River City, Iowa.
No way.
It's Mason City, Iowa, but that's where I was born.
That's funny.
That is awesome.
Well, you've got trouble. You've got trouble in River City.
And I was there, and I watched the parade on Federal Avenue with Hedda Hopper and Shirley Jones and Robert Preston as they went into the movie theater.
Oh, that is awesome. That is awesome.
The very first actor I directed was Robert Preston. He was a joy to work with, and he really was fun. But he only asked for one thing. He wanted 2 margaritas at the end of the shoot. That was it.
I'm glad you didn't ask for them before the shoot. We're going to turn it over to Mike. Take it away, Michael Faber.
Thank you, Stephen. I do appreciate it. You've reached the end of this episode of the Tales from Hollywoodland podcast. Always remember, we couldn't do this without you. We want to hear from you, so please write us anytime at talesfromhollywoodland@gmail.com. Remember, you could find us wherever fine podcasts are found, and now you could even find us up on our YouTube channel. If you made it this far into the episode, why not subscribe and give us a thumbs up? Or if you're listening to us, please give us 5 stars. If you're into any kind of social media, please check us up on Instagram and Facebook. Before we get out of here, let's thank the guys and see what's going on their shows. Julian, who are you talking to this week?
This week is the Emmy Award-winning journalist and playwright and actress Joy Behar, who turns out to have a very interesting life way before The View. And what's more interesting to me was, even though for years I thought she was part of the Jewish heritage, she's Italian.
Well, That's news. I did not know that. There you go.
Yeah.
That is
Okay.
awesome. Steve, what's cooking over on Saturday night at the movies?
Well, at a time when political leadership is an important issue in our country, we hearken back to World War II and the special friendship between Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Winston Churchill. My friend Mark Isaacs has written a web series of essays for young people on the nature of that friendship, which was very unique. Both FDR and Churchill were not known for their circle of friends. They kept very much to themselves. So they became each other's best friend during that period.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. Robert, thanks again for joining us tonight. We do appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, Robert, those books are wonderful that you write. And as I said at the beginning of the show, the kind of extensive research you do, the idea that you not only are writing about that topic, but you bring in other histories is just so fascinating. I agree with Barbara Friedman, Arthur's wife. You're one hell of a writer.
Thank you.
And guests, you were a lot of fun. This is great.
Okay. Thank you. I enjoyed this much.
All right, man.
That is awesome. On behalf of Steve, Arthur, and Julian, thanks again for listening. This is your producer and announcer, Mike Faber. We'll see you next time on Tales from Hollywoodland. Your Hollywood adventure starts right here.
The sun is shining, but the monsters are still out there because horror doesn't take a vacation. This is Earth Station Boo, the spooky and kooky podcast where we talk all things horror. I'm T, and Karen and I are here all season long, digging into classic creatures, the latest screams, and every spooky thing in between. Find us wherever you get your podcasts. Join the Discord and watch our socials for some spooky good times. We know you're dying to listen. Let's get spooky.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.